In this video, I'm going to show you how to use a relative clause to up-level your writing. Now, relative clauses add more detail to a sentence and they can help us to describe a person or an object. They are a Year 5 grammar feature, and so they're really useful to use in your writing and a good skill to show that you are capable of using. So, relative clauses need a few things. They need, and we will write a checklist, a relative pronoun, which is here on the right. They need commas, and I will show you exactly where they need commas after. And they need to add detail to a sentence. The final thing that is important about relative clauses is they need to make sense on their own. That means if you were to remove the relative clause from a sentence, the sentence would still make sense. So, makes sense is the easiest way I can describe that. And we'll go into showing you that in a moment. So the first thing we need in a relative clause is a relative pronoun. Now over here, we have 4 relative pronouns. So what we need is we need to choose the relative pronoun that is fit for the sentence we are writing out. And there are a couple of guidelines for this. So the most commonly used relative pronoun is who. And we would use who when we are describing a person. I'll go ahead and draw a little person there to help us. So we use who when we're describing a person. We also have which we use for animals, objects, or ideas. Okay, so if I put animals, object, I'm going to draw a box to show it's an object. We then have whose, and this is for possession. This is if it belongs to someone. So possession, so we could put a hand. If I remember how many fingers, we'll try. And then the final relative pronoun we have is that. And this one, again, can be used for people, animals, or objects. Okay, so if I use the symbols. People, object, and animals. I'll write animals, save you my drawing. So it can be used for all 3. Again, you just read through and you'll kind of rehearse it in your head to work out which relative pronoun is going to make the most sense in your sentence. So we have an example and we're going to show how we use it. And through this process, I can then demonstrate to you those 4 steps, these 4 guidelines here in actual process. So we have a sentence. Fern fed Wilbur his milk and placed him in the small box in the kitchen. So at the moment, you might be thinking, where do I add a relative clause to that? So you add a relative clause after a noun. Okay, so a subject, so an object or a person. It can be a pronoun. Now I'm going to choose Fern. Okay, so your relative clause can come at the start of a sentence. It could come in the middle of a sentence. Here we're just going to use it with Fern. So we start off and we'll write out our sentence again. So Fern. And this is where we use our commas. So you need a comma before and after the relative clause. So there we have, and I'll do it in red so you can see the relative clause, our comma. So Fern, and I'm talking about a person, so I'm going to use the pronoun who. So Fern, who, and this is where we give a little bit of extra information about the noun, so the person or the object or the animal. So Fern, we know she lives on a farm, so who lives on a farm, and that's my extra information. So to close that relative clause, I then use my comma again. So as we can see, if we check our tick list, I've got a relative pronoun, I've got my commas, I've added detail. We know that Fern lives on a farm, and after we're done, we'll read it back through and make sure it makes sense. Now you've finished off with your closing comma, we're going to continue with our sentence. So we continue. So fed Wilbur. Wilbur has a capital letter because it is pronoun. It's the name of the little pig. His milk. another noun, and placed him. Placed means put. In the small box. Again, box, you could use a relative pronoun after that and add a relative clause. In the kitchen. Now, after I'm done and finish off with a full stop, it is the end of my sentence. I'm going to read it back through and make sure it makes sense. So, Fern, who lives on a farm, fed Wilbur his milk and placed him in the small box in the kitchen. Okay, sounds good. It makes sense. Now, the true check is to remove that relative clause, cover it up, and see if this sentence makes sense again. So, Fern fed Wilbur his milk and placed him in the small box in the kitchen. Both sentences make sense. It has a relative clause in it, so obviously that is a Year 5 grammar feature, and we've immediately improved that sentence. So use the tick list, have a look at your relative pronouns, and have a go at improving your own sentence.